With the Wraithlord Harbor, you can summon David Harbor directly into your last Epoch game to destroy your enemies, making this by far the most powerful build in last Epoch, or at the very least the most powerful minion build. But it's been a little bit of a journey to get here, because as it turns out, the Wraithlord might be powerful, but can also be a little bit temperamental. So today I'm going to go over how to feed your hungry Wraithlord, some of the gearing decisions that you make to enhance your pseudo-invincibility, and everything that got me here. Last Epoch isn't the only game that I've played recently, so if you want to see what else I was playing in February, then head over to my second channel, linked down in the description, and check that video out. Alternatively, if you want to see how everything I've learned playing this rather temperamental build has given me some ideas to change builds I previously played and make them even better, get subscribed, leave a like, and for now, let's head into those Wraithlord details. If you ever watched the Fate series and thought, you know, fighting in the Holy Grail War sounds pretty cool, well, playing Wraithlord is probably about as close as you'll ever get to having your heroic spirit unleash its noble phantasm. Though last Epoch has about a 99% reduction in anime waifus, but hey, the economy's tough right now, so I get it. After empowering the Wraithlord, the necrotic beams absolutely blast things into oblivion. In fact, most of the bosses that you saw blown away in the introduction seemed to die before boss DR even really kicked in. I thought Falcon Dive Bomber was broken, but apparently I hadn't played a truly broken build yet. Which is also why I ended up going low life, since it seemed like the best way to keep myself alive, and then I grabbed some minion life to keep the Wraithlord alive as well. In low corruption, this wasn't a problem, but as I was getting to 500 plus, the Wraithlord did start dying, and when the Wraithlord starts dying, that's really bad. So I would say this build is a lot more gear intensive than the other things I've played and recommended before. If you're just starting fresh, I don't advise you play this build. Also keep in mind that where many builds in last Epoch excel in highly dense areas, the Wraithlord actually gets weaker. He destroys 3, and exactly 3 enemies with every cast. If there's 3 enemies on the screen, he will Thanos snap them out of existence. If there's 300 enemies on the screen, now there's 297 enemies on the screen, and they're probably fully capable of overrunning you and killing you. Yeah, numbers are absolutely his weakness. So now let's get into some of Wraithlord's rather particular mechanics. Let's start by talking about the Wraithlord's mechanics. As you can see, he is just happily blasting a dummy here. And there's 2 Wraiths that are helping him. That's because I have twin spirits. This is very important for 2 reasons. The first is, it unlocks Sequel of Avarice, which gives 180% more damage. Second is because by default the Wraithlord only does 4 things, in roughly this priority. Number 1, he attempts to eat any minion in existence that is not a Wraith. If he is stuck doing this, he won't do anything else, which can be very problematic when he can't reach the minions that he's trying to eat, or he eats them but thinks he hasn't. Yeah, always fully feed your hungry Wraithlord. The second thing he tries to do is summon more Wraiths. So, the more Wraiths that you can have, the more time he spends summoning, and the less time he spends blasting. The third thing is he tends to move around, and he'll just get really distracted. Now, you can fix this by touching him, but if you don't want to have to constantly run on top of your Wraithlord, you could also just use Locus of Death. Because as it turns out, when your minions are uncooperative, just take away the right to move. And actually, that means he does even more damage, so it's a win-win. As you can see, he's just sitting here, happily blasting. So now, how do you set up for your Wraithlord? When I'm mapping, I put up my Infernal Shade. This deals damage to the Wraithlord. Don't worry, he'll leech it back no problem, in exchange for giving him a nice little attack speed steroid. I can also put on Dread Shade, which gives him auto crit and a massive damage bonus. Those numbers are getting pretty toasty. But here's the thing, remember how I said he eats minions? Let's feed him some zombies, or zombies, however you say it. Yeah, all of a sudden, he spends a little bit of time eating minions, and I think those were 10 millions. Yeah, he does massive damage. So much so that it pretty much ignores boss DR. This is because part of a Wraithlord is this, where while at max Wraiths, the Wraithlord casts necrotic beams. See, that's why I said he likes to summon stuff, and he'll also consume minions, giving plus 10 spell damage for 10 seconds. Which means I'm giving him 690 because he's eating 69 minions, which I didn't plan that, but hey, it's a pretty nice addition. So let's give an example of Monolith gameplay. First thing, when you enter Monolith, you need to summon a new Wraithlord. Why? Otherwise, you can't put your shades on it. Don't ask me why. Oh, and you're not supposed to tank those, but hey, it's not going to matter. Summon some zombies, feed your Wraithlord, then you just kind of teleport through. These enemies aren't really your concern. A few of them will be blasted out of existence for sure, but you're mostly just running and chilling. Do watch for those little groups. You're not supposed to teleport into them. As it turns out, it's a little bit hard to look at both the screen and the camera with my setup. I should probably fix that at some point, but I don't really know how to because my camera's mounted on my monitor and my monitor's kind of tall. But hey, when you get to an objective, you can summon a few zombies on the objective, tell it to attack. It'll, blast stuff around it, and there you go. On to the next objective. I'm not even bothering to keep up full buffs here. Sometimes being 1 or 2 potions short does mean more potions drop, which you can use to buff the Wraithlord. Overall, though, that doesn't matter too much. Let's see. Feed him and buff him, and boom. Map done. This is how you set up for a boss. First thing, summon your Wraithlord. Then buff your Wraithlord. Now, here's the tricky part. You need to get the Wraithlord with all of his buffs over to the boss. You start by feeding him all the zombies and all their parasites. Then you teleport and just watch him annihilate the boss. I think I waited a little too long because I was busy explaining and all the buffs fell off. Oh well, there's always next time to set it up properly. And yeah, that's how you nuke Lagan. Now next up, I am going to talk about the skills, passives, blessings, idols, and gearing. But if you want a handy reference, such as a planner, there's a public build over on Maxwell, and I have a link directly in my Discord. So you can use that as a handy reference if you want to check anything about the build. But I strongly recommend that you watch the following sections to better understand why I'm making these choices. So let's start by getting into the skills. First up, Summon Wraith. You'll absolutely need this one since this is how you get the Wraithlord. And there's a couple of important places where you need to go. First, you need to come up to Locus of Death to prevent the Wraithlord from moving. Otherwise, it's going to waste its time trying to run around in circles for no goddamn reason. Then you go Locus of Resurrection. Well, actually, you did that before. You path through Haunting. The health is actually somewhat relevant here, so that's not too bad. Twin Spirits, and down to Sequel of Avarice for the 180% more damage, 90% more health. The size and melee area don't really seem to affect the Wraithlord, nor are they particularly relevant. On the other hand, coming up to Reapers gives you a little bit of necrotic damage. Given how much base damage you get from eating zombies, not relevant. But when you're not eating zombies, such as when you're clearing, slightly relevant. It's like 1 zombie worth. Actually, no, zombies plus 30. Never mind, it's like 1/3 of a zombie worth. That's why I only have 3 points in it. And then I have 3 points in Necrotic Hunger, because that is 60% more necrotic damage, which is the Wraithlord's main type, and a whole bunch of Leech, which is important for keeping him alive. Then you have to path through here. This doesn't matter at all. Spirit Link, additional crit strike chance. Yeah, about that. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. Still doesn't matter. Here we go, free crit multi. The reason this doesn't matter is your Dreadshade gives the Wraithlord auto crit, and your melee wraiths will most often just be out of melee range anyway. So yeah. Now Wraithlord buffs. First up, Infernal Shade. You get up here over to Devour in Flames, so you can put it on your minions. Then you give them permanent haste. Then Subjugation. So it deals direct damage, which isn't necessarily great, because now it's going to be killing your Wraithlord faster. What is great is this, Manic Pyre. It's 72% increased attack and cast speed. The cast speed is a massive bonus. And then aside of that, you just take basic, utility nodes. None of this matters. Once you have this spec'd out, you're good. Oh, and Soulfire, so it's permanent. Now, the other buff is Dreadshade. The first and most important thing, you want to start with Lone Watcher. That way, you get huge quality of life. Then second of all, you come down to All for One for 40% more damage on the Wraithlord and Egoism, so the auto crits. I also really like Deadlock. That way, well, he's rooted, which is normally a downside. Doesn't matter, by the way. Not actually a downside anymore. But he taunts everything around him, so he can't move. Enemies run towards him. Enemies get obliterated. On the other hand, Blind Fury, it's extra cast speed. Because, him being blinded doesn't seem to do anything. And for the rest, you just click things that say more damage. I mean, this is base damage, it doesn't really do much. This is area, doesn't really do much. This is more damage from Grim Fate. And this is a little bit more from Flesh Harvest as his health drains down. Alternatively, you can go Doomed Wrath. Doomed Wrath does result in the Wraithlord hitting harder. Sort of. Because then it ramps a whole bunch of poisons from Pernicious Pact. I found this whole setup to be annoying. Realistically, it's not that much more damage, since you're not going to be putting full investment into it without taking it out of other damage modes. I guess if I had +3, then maybe I'd consider it. You'll definitely need a little bit of extra Wraithlord health, though, to deal with the degen from poison. Because I don't have the +3 to Dreadshade, and because that's a chest piece mod, good luck, you'll need like a 3+ LP Exsanguinous. Yeah, doesn't really matter too much. Now here, you could actually get a couple extra points to play around with if you had +2 Dreadshade levels. There's nothing super relevant here, like melee attack speed, what's that going to do? That's not going to do much. Health, not actually terrible. I will admit, if you had extra points, you'd probably want to put them into Grave Reality. I don't think there's actually anything else super relevant here. I suppose more health and haunting. Next up, Volatile Zombie. The whole point of this is to use your Volatile Zombies to get extra minions, so you take Vile Force. Oh, and Dreadful Horde. That way you summon a whole bunch of zombies instead of just one, and then Wraithlord eats them, and then he eats all the bugs. Aside of that, the rest of the tree, Ravenous for no reason other than you need to get to Pull of the Grave, and I couldn't think of a genuine use for the extra points. Coming over here just to get Marked for Death, although I also have Marked for Death from a passive, so it's not super important. Down here for healing, which becomes Ward, and then a chance to indirectly summon a zombie when another minion dies. Happens occasionally, it's not super important to be honest. So yeah, this is the Summon Zombie utility tree. You may notice a theme where a lot of the passives aren't super impactful. Yeah, turns out Wraithlord is insanely powerful. Doesn't need no passives. Then here, it's pretty much full utility spec. You know, reliable bone armor, put bone curse on stuff, and then convert it over to necrotic. Because I don't think the extra area actually matters, and hey, if it's necrotic, at least it's technically scaling off of extra stuff, maybe. Didn't end up with actual necrotic damage to scale it, so this is probably a pointless point. Maybe you go Scarlet Rain instead. In Acolyte, I ended up going very defensive. Forbidden Knowledge for intelligence. 1 point here. A little bit of damage from Dark Rituals. The faster the Wraithlord casts, the better. And over here, Unnatural Preservation, Word Retention, Necrotic Res, Poison Res, all the good stuff. You could probably go Blood Aura for minion damage instead, but it does so much damage that it didn't feel relevant. And then Soul Aegis. I don't think 300 flat armor really does all that much, but it doesn't hurt. In Lich, it's just some int and mana regen. Mana regen isn't too important. Really, it's just an extra way to get some int. Most of the points come from the Necromancer tree. Who would have known Necromancers practice necromancy, just like how archers arch. So, Risen Army, the first thing you start with, it's minion damage, attack, cast speed. That cast speed is super important because that is the number of things he gets to vaporize per second. Grave Thorns helps keep a minion alive, also quite important. And I grabbed Reclamation of Souls for some ward retention. Put a full 10 points here. Cursed Blood, it's extra minion necrotic damage. Finally, Aegis Fall, minions have 100% armor shred. And 1 point here so that when all the minions get eaten, they count as dying and more things get marked. Most of your power is going to be in the top of the tree though. So, we've got Frantic Summons. Very, very impactful node. It also leads into River of Bones. Now, this is an interesting one because a lot of those bonuses don't actually do anything. However, the increased health leech and crit strike damage leech to his health is quite nice. It means that as he hits harder and harder and harder, he'll full heal himself on every hit. I really like this. I thought that in practice it played really well and outperformed what it seemed to do on paper. But if you don't find it to be too performant, especially if you're in low corruption and don't need the leech, you can drop it for damage elsewhere. Damage like this, 70% minion crit multi. You can ignore the rest. Oh, and also here's some necrotic and Ellie res, plus a whole bunch of minion necrotic damage. Very, very nice node, probably one of the strongest here. When I'm level 100, I'll put the last point in Veins of Malice. He already has haste. I'm pretty sure he doesn't get frenzy any other way. So, another 20% cast and attack speed. Then down here, Tyrant for player health, thus defenses. Coupled with 1 point in Cling to Life. It felt like it was a little bit worth it, just because I'm going to have a floating point anyway at level 100. That said, if you don't need the extra life, there are a few other options. For example, you could go Wisp Weaver. You could put another point here. You don't really need the extra points in Moonlight Pyre. Sure, it's base damage, which again is quality of life, but instead you could go to Elixir of Hunger for a bit of extra health. There's definitely some flexibility in the tree. I ended up prioritizing what felt good to me personally, though as a note, with Elixir of Hunger, you could get a little bit of cast speed. So now that I've played more with the Potion Burst setup, I'm probably going to be, for the final version of this, dropping Moonlight Pyre for Elixir of Hunger for a little bit more boss damage. That said, I do think that these base numbers, despite not being super high, are relevant when clearing. So if you're in lower corruptions, this is very much a speed farming setup, but I'm getting to like 600 corruption, so I should probably focus a little more on personal defenses and a little more on single target. All right, now let's talk about blessings, gear, and idols. Starting with blessings. I'm using Grand Echo of Solarum because I wanted to cap my Void Res, and I was told by chat that I can't change this because it's 69. Fun fact, I also summoned 69 minions, so I can't change that either. Then over here, Grand Resonance of a Sea for ward per second. This isn't particularly well rolled. It's 30 to 42. I just don't want to fight Lagan a bunch of times. Grand Survival of Might. This number doesn't matter. What matters is that you are crit void capped. As long as you're crit void capped with whatever it rolls, you're good. Grand Resolve of Grail ideally should be 75, but Heorot's being a bad horsey. He is not giving me a perfect rolled blessing. So it's 67, which is close enough most of the time. And then from Spirits of Fire, a really solid Spirit of Command for extra minion damage. Coming over to my idols, double health idols are very fun. These are all very, very fun. Then I'm using just a few res idols to cap my res. And that's about it. And then I was using the minion cooldown recovery speed because those are the ones that keep dropping with high % health. Realistically, these should just be double health. But hey, the 8 and 9% ones seem to really like rolling minion cooldown recovery speed. So that's what I'm using for now. You can also use extra Ellie res, whatever ends up working out best for you. Now for the rest of the gear, I do have to warn you, there are a couple of things that you'll really want to make the build feel better. First is these experimental gloves, because they're a massive amount of ward generation. 12% of missing health gained as ward per second, when you have about 3,700 health, is a lot. Right now I'm sitting at about 12,000 stable ward, which is quite nice. When I take these off, watch how quickly it drops. It's just gonna go straight into freefall. We're losing thousands of ward just from this one item. So yeah, very important. Now, another thing that's very, very, very important is Last Steps of a Living with the Minion modifier. That is an experimental mod. For increased minion damage, minions are teleported to you. You really want 4 or so. Technically, it doesn't have to be 5 like I have. This is super, 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 super important. Use Tunk Lab's calculator to make sure you can get this and make sure you can farm LP Last Steps of a Living. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time with this build. Some people use Skeleton Mage Teleport. Technically, it's functional, but I found once I rooted my Wraithlord, it started bugging out, and half the time it just wouldn't teleport him. This teleports him every single time. If you're going to be playing a low life build, you 100% need this. That's part of why I said this is more gear intensive. You also need the Volatile Zombies summoned on potion use on a T6 or T7 cooldown recovery bell. The cooldown recovery is important for your transplant so that you can teleport the Wraithlord around the map correctly. The zombies are how you burst bosses down in seconds. My boss kill time went from like 30 seconds to 4 seconds once I started using the zombie belt. Now, I don't know about you, but I think 30 seconds is really long and completely unacceptable. I mean, that's ridiculous. 30 seconds fighting a boss? Come on. So the belt's mandatory. Okay, jokes aside, this is one of a few that, while it is very impactful and probably does become mandatory eventually at high corruption, if you're just getting started, you do not need it. You can just get cooldown recovery. And if you happen to get way luckier than I did, I tried to get cooldown recovery here. Originally, those boots were actually T6 movement speed, which I hit, T5 cooldown, T5 or 4 minion hybrid, and I think hybrid health. Sadly, hit the minion mod, good, not complaining about that. Didn't have a cooldown. Ideally, you probably want cooldown here over movement speed because the more you can teleport, the less you need to walk. You also need Nyx Sanguinis with % health. The other mod doesn't really matter. As you can see, I have Summon Skeleton on here just for minion damage. That's because my Summon Wraith chest didn't land. If you can, get T7 increased health. If you can't, T6 well rolled is fine. Flat health is also okay. Just a 1 LP Exsanguinous with health is totally fine. Aside of that, extra defensive stats like a big % armor roll might mean you could actually go armor on this build. I'm not really doing that, and I haven't felt squishy yet. But health, because that determines how much wood you get and how much wood you generate. It's a measure of your overall survivability. For the Wraithlord, I did land the T7 health and +1 to summon Volatile Zombie. Sadly, I didn't get that to T5 before slamming it on, but I only needed the 1 point anyway. I kind of ran out of useful things to put points into, so it's not a big deal. And there's only so many T7 health. Well, I guess if you're Merchant's Guild, maybe there's plenty now, but I'm playing Circle of Fortune, and when I played Merchant's Guild, there were only so many T7 health items up on the market. Also, Wraithlord Harbor itself, 2 LP, it's moderately rare. I wouldn't expect to get one. I would expect to get a 1 LP one, so just consider the Volatile Zombie stuff icing on the cake. On the other hand, for Death Rattle, any Death Rattle is fine. 1 LP is relatively common. I happen to hit health here. T6 or T7 health is the ideal, but any Death Rattle is totally fine. Higher minion crit multi is better. It's just a massive damage steroid for your Wraithlord. As you can see so far, there's a really big focus on keeping me, the player, alive. That's because Wraithlord already does more or less infinite damage. So, what about things that add a little bit of damage? Well, that'd be the weapon. That minion spell, minion bow damage, really good. The Soul Harvester of a Coven, because he gets so much base damage, that's a fun bug. So because Wraithlord gets so much base damage from eating the zombies, that roll isn't actually super important. I think one of these with T7 Necrotic Pen is your best in slot weapon for damage. In terms of best in slot weapons for defenses, Chronostasis is an option. For damage, I guess Apogee of Frozen Light, but I don't think you can get the spell bow. Unfortunately, you'd have to get melee bow. Just as a quick note on what mod to look for. Though, I also don't think you can get Necrotic Pen, so maybe the 24-ish% more multi on Apogee doesn't actually outweigh the 145% increase plus the Necrotic Pen. But it's something worth considering. I honestly haven't explored that level of min-max because I haven't needed either more damage or more defenses yet. And this weapon's pretty darn good, so I'm happy with it. Ignore the prefixes, they're literally irrelevant. Offhand is very defensive. I put this on when I first threw the character together, and then I was just too lazy to change it. But realistically, you should have a 16 int roll here. The word per second and word retention are really good, that's why I kept this. Minion damage, the other stat could be intelligence or minion life. Suffixes are whatever you're missing. Doesn't particularly matter. In my case, it happened to be Elirez, so this was more or less perfect. For Putrid Souls, word per second's pretty good. Intelligence is pretty good. Minion damage is okay. Minion life is okay. I really like the frailty so that when I transplant onto stuff, they're a little bit weaker. And extra health is always nice. The reason I like the Putrid Souls is it helps to cap my poison res. The rings, base type, Ivory Ring is good if you want Ward Decay threshold. Turquoise Ring is better for damage. I happen to have a T6 minion health ring. I found this to be really nice. One of the min-max things that I would do is probably upgrade this to a T7 version. And then I have Crit Avoid on one of my rings. You'll need Crit Avoid somewhere. One T5 roll that's at least decently rolled. I think technically right now I'm actually 1% short. So I should probably go farm the dragon to get myself exactly to 100% instead of 99. But getting any sort of T6, T7 health here, that's really nice. If you can get it on your gloves, that's also really nice. Because the more health that you can stack, the more ward that you're able to maintain. And it's a very min-max endgame thing. Try to get a higher tier, either tier 6 or tier 7, for current health lost, missing health gained as ward. That's an incredibly powerful modifier, and it would absolutely push my ward up. Though so do chronostasis. Just for example, I think I have one lying around here somewhere. Oh, apparently when you type in chrono, wrong warp comes up. So let's see what happens here. I'm sitting at about 12,000 stable, and all of a sudden it just shoots up. That's that word gen kicking in. The more word that you can generate per second, that's the important stat there. And the better your retention, which does come from stacking intelligence, better. Yeah, I go up to about 13,000 word. It's starting to slow down. It'll probably hit 13.3, 13.4K. No, maybe 13.2 actually. Might stop around 13.2. Yeah, very solid defensive item. And like everything else, it's a balance. Right now, I feel like it's okay to have the damage. It's still allowing me to insta-kill bosses, and I'm not dying too frequently. But later on, I could very much see myself swapping to an LP chronostasis. When playing Wraithlord, you very much need to lean into the objective rush meta. If you decide to clear everything on your screen every time, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to take a very long time. Because remember, the Wraithlord kills 3 things per attack. Admittedly, sometimes even less, because occasionally, if you aren't keeping your Dreadshade up, your Wraithlord won't actually one-shot something, especially if you're not feeding Wraithlord zombies. So, if you want to keep feeding Wraithlord zombies, one thing to do is always make sure you are 1 below the maximum number of potions. I've noticed that whenever you're below the maximum number of potions, more will drop. You can run over them, you can pick them up. That means more zombies for the Wraithlord. This leads to an actually rather active playstyle. Though if you're blitzing through low-tier content, then you don't need to worry about that at all. You can go for the super passive stuff, and it's a-okay. Now, something else I noticed, coming from Path of Exile, is it's a little counterintuitive. Usually, I would expect to be destroying multiple monsters on the screen. All the monsters on the screen, actually. And finding out that, unlike many of the other last Epoch builds I played, the AoE here is quite lacking was an adjustment. I kept trying to find ways to add AoE. Then I realized that AoE isn't really necessary. Because again, you're not being judged on how many monsters you kill, and the things you kill behind you don't drop loot anyway, because if you don't see it or pick it up, it's not actually there. Once I did that, I started blasting through corruption, almost hitting 600. Then I started to get bored. Which happens quite a lot whenever I get to fairly high corruption in last Epoch. 600 is not anywhere near the limit of this build, and I'm sure the more I pushed, the more I'd be pushed to improve the build. When I was playing it early on, I didn't think minion health was an important stat. I would have said damage is the only prefix that's relevant, because what else can you use your prefixes for? Vitality? I mean, I guess vitality. But no, it turns out minion health is quite relevant. You'll get some of this from your intelligence, so I could have slightly better prefixes on my gear to stack more intelligence, maybe as opposed to some of the minion damage minion level stuff. I'll have to try that again with a different chest piece if I get another 2LP Exsanguinous. But aside of that, you also do need to increase that to then multiply it with the Wraith passives. That's where plus Wraith levels would come in on a chest piece. In lower corruption, this doesn't matter nearly as much. In fact, you can even tank a lot of boss abilities if you have good intelligence. I also personally haven't found that paying too much attention to damage stacking is that important. If I put on something like a chronostasis instead of my weapon, yes, I will actually notice the difference, where if I'm not using my zombies, the damage is quite a bit lower. And if I'm using my zombies, at that point, no, it's pretty much the same. But it means a more active playstyle, and I tend to be a little bit more relaxed, so until I started dying, I wasn't going to swap to something more defensive. I also think you could possibly go for something like Frostbite Shackles and stack Cold Res to get even more word, but then you're playing a game between how much life do you get and how much Cold Res do you get. Cold Res is more word retention, whereas life is, well, more word. You can't use Bone Clemmer Barboot. Technically, you could get a really cool node in Warlock that gives you ward retention based on Necro Res, but it's kind of a helmet. And so until you figure out how to play a 2-headed ogre in last Epoch, you're stuck with a Wraithlord. This build has been a little bit of an emotional roller coaster. I'll admit I leveled up as Minion Army with no real expectations, aside of I had a cool hat and wanted to try it out. And at first I didn't think it was very good, because the build was incredibly janky. I was using Bone Curse, and so often the Wraithlord would just get stuck trying to eat the bone walls. Except he'd have to walk through the bone walls, which he couldn't do, to then eat them from the middle. Why did he have to be in the middle to eat them? I don't know. So I rooted him in place. And then he'd get stuck trying to eat them because he was still, for some reason, just trying to eat them instead of attacking enemies. Drop that for Volatile Zombie. I can see why people use it. I do think if you're not min-maxed, if the AI pathed correctly, Bone Curse would be better. But the AI does not path correctly, so Bone Curse is worse. Then after that, it was still pretty janky. I tried the Skeleport stuff. That also felt janky. It just stopped teleporting my Wraithlord randomly. So I stopped using that. I found out you can't cast Shades on the Wraithlord at the start of a map, and if you prevent him from moving, it'll also prevent him from attacking at the start of a map. Unless you resummon him. This is some weird grace period thing. Yeah, I'm starting to think of a Wraithlord as just a collection of bugs in a trench coat. And at least as far as I can tell, almost every single bug is actually detrimental to the build, rather than beneficial. So it's kind of the opposite of Warlock. Now, I don't know. Maybe he's doing 5 times the damage he should. Maybe there's going to be some adjustment in the near patch notes. I have no idea because it got a little hard to track exactly where all the damage was coming from. But at least from the things that I could track, it seemed to mostly be working as intended, at least once I took away the Wraithlord's ability to move and locked him into a very specific turret playstyle. And then the final epiphany was that I could just stack cooldown reduction and teleport more with Transplant. After I started doing that, the build ended up surprisingly smooth. Sure, I'd get in trouble if I tried to wave clear too much, but I could even do arena waves relatively comfortably. I had absolutely massive damage. I could cheese bosses with a zombie belt. That was a fairly late addition as well. Again, I don't think you absolutely need it, but once you get it, you notice it. And so the experience has been really good. I'll admit I haven't played Squirrels. I know Squirrels are also very strong, but at least right now, it very much feels like Wraithlord is just that little bit stronger. So, in my opinion, Wraithlord is last Epoch's strongest minion build. I know, someone's gonna say, but Abomination's better. No, I'm not sitting there for 30 minutes just to summon stuff to make a good Abomination. Forget it. Nope. Quality of life on that is way too low. But I would also say that the minion AI in last Epoch is a little bit jank. And that's kind of standard for a lot of ARPGs. Probably because making good minion AI is hard. Path of Exile used to be really terrible, but it's gotten better. Diablo 4, I don't know if minions are still in Diablo 4. I'd have to check on that. The one ARPG that I think does minion AI really well is Torchlight Infinite. Those minions have the best AI out of any ARPG. They definitely beat the Wraithlord, and I'd love to see Wraithlord given the same kind of AI as the Frost Spirits have in Torchlight, where they're super good at getting into the enemy's face and then retaliating because, yes, I made a Frost Spirit Retaliate build. I'll link to that down below for anyone who's curious. And so, if you're a minion enjoyer, or if you never play minions, what are your thoughts on minion AI in ARPGs? Do you find it good, bad, frustrating, easy to work with? Let me know down in the comments below. If you're looking to watch something after this, well, you can check out some of my other videos talking about Wraithlord, or some of the streams where I was actually playing him. Alternatively, if you want a different build, consider Divebomb Falconer or Torment Warlock. Both are extremely strong in their own right. Or if you're looking for something completely different, then head over to my second channel and check out the best games that I played from February 2024, or some standout games from Steam Next, which was also in February. Links to all of those will be up in the card and down below. Before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. Link to support is also down below. I wouldn't really say I'm the sort of person who enjoys minion builds, and to be fair, I didn't enjoy Wraithlord for quite a while. But in the end, it ended up being both fun and powerful, and hey, deleting bosses in a couple seconds is fun as long as you're only doing it occasionally. It was the same reason I enjoyed Penance-Brain Slayer in Path of Exile. So thank you to everyone who watched to the end, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you again in the next one.